Okay, we are in Maseches Bava Kama Daf Kaf Amid Aleph. We're going down to the bottom of the daf, and we're beginning the sugya of Zen Nehene v'Zen Lo Chaser. The Gemara begins, Amar le Rav Chisda l'Rami Bar Chama. Rav Chisda said to Rami Bar Chama, Lo havid gaban beorta betchuma d'ibayalan mili ma'alyata. What a shame that you weren't with us last night when we were at the Tchum, at the edge of town. Rashi says the significance of this is that at the edge of town was often where the base medrash was. The Ibayalan milim al yatza. When we were asking, we raised these excellent questions. Amar Rami Bar Chama said back to Rav Chisda, "My milim al yata. What were these excellent questions that you raised?" Amar le. Rav Chisda said back to Rami Bar Chama, "Hadar b'chatzer chavero shalomi da'ato tzarich la'alot lo schar o ein tzarich." If a person is a squatter, if they're living in another person's courtyard, they're crashing there without that person's knowledge, without the owner's knowledge, do they have to pay rent or not? In principle, would they owe the person money or would they not? So the Gemara says, Heichi dami, what exactly are the circumstances that we're talking about here? Ilema bechatzer delo kaima la'agra, v'gavra delo avid lemegar. If you say we're talking about a courtyard that did not stand to be rented out, it wasn't going to be put on the market anyway, the Gavar de lo Avid Lemegar, and we're talking about a person that wouldn't have otherwise paid rent somewhere else anyway. So that's not what we could be talking about because that seems pretty obvious. That's a case of Ze lo nehenev, ze lo chaser. I'm not benefiting, you're not losing, so clearly I shouldn't have to pay. Ella bechatzer de kaima la'agra, the Gavra de Avid Lemegar. Rather, if you say we're talking about a case of a courtyard that did stand to be rented out, and we're talking about a person who would have otherwise paid rent somewhere else until they found this opportunity to crash in your courtyard, that's a case of zen nehenev zeh chaser. That's a case where one person is benefiting and the other person is losing. And the Gemara means to say it seems obvious that in such a case you would be chayav to pay to pay rent to that person. Lo tzricha. So rather, no, this is necessary. This question is referring to a case where b'chatzer de lo kaima la'agra, where of a courtyard that did not stand to be rented out. It wasn't going to be put on the market to be put up for rent on Airbnb, whatever. V'gavra de avid lemegar, but the person would have paid potentially somewhere else until they found this opportunity came along to crash on your property. So the owner isn't losing, but the squatter, the person crashing, is actually benefiting. So in such a case, what's the rule here? My matzi amarle. So what could the person say? He could say, my chasartik. The squatter could say, what loss am I causing you? Why should I have to pay? Oh, Dilma, or maybe on the other hand, really the logic goes by the following, that matzi amar, the owner could say to the squatter, it doesn't matter that I didn't lose anything, that I didn't lose anything, ha'itanit. The bottom line is you benefited from my property, and so you should have to pay me. So we're left with this question of, does a squatter who's crashing without the owner's knowledge at their expense, not at their expense, does the squatter have to pay money or not? Do you have to pay the person or do you not? Okay, so now we get to the beginning of an answer here. Amar le Rami Bar Chama replied to Rav Chisda, matnitinhi. The answer to this question is found explicitly in a Mishnah. Hey matnitin, Rav Chisda wants to know what Mishnah are you referring to? Amar le Rami Bar Chama, before he answers, he says, lechi teshamishli. First, as soon as you do a personal act of service for me, then I'll answer you. So Shakal Sudre Karachle, Rav Chisda took Rami Bar Chama's scarf and folded it for him, and only then Amar Le, Rami Bar Chama said to him, the Mishnah is Imnenit Mishalemet Mashanenit, that if an animal benefits by eating produce from someone's field, then the person Mishalemet Mashanenit, the owner has to pay whatever that animal benefited. Okay, that's Rami Bar Chama's first answer. Now Rava doesn't like this at all. Amar Rava comments, how spared from concern and worry is a person whose master supports him, meaning Hashem, that even though the Mishnah that Rami Bar Chama told to Rav Chisda is completely different than the case of our original question of the squatter, it's completely different, and yet Rav Chisda happily accepted it. How is it different? Because the case of the Mishnah that Rami Bar Chama just brought up of an animal eating someone else's produce, that's a case of one benefiting and the other one losing. You're benefiting at someone else's expense. Whereas our original question, v'hai, our original question, ze nehena v'ze lo chaserhu. That's a case of where one person is benefiting, but the other person is not losing. Ze nehena v'ze lo chaser. So how could Rami Bar Chama compare the two? And the Gemara comments, v'Rami Bar Chama, the reason that Rami Bar Chama sees these two cases as comparable is because he says, Stam perut b'rshut harabim afkure mafker lehu. He holds that that generally speaking, if a person leaves his fruits out in a reshut harabim, he effectively abandoned them. He made them hefker, and so he's not really losing out if someone takes them. Okay, so that Mishnah didn't work. Now we're going to try another one. Tnan, we learned in another Mishnah, Hamakif Chaveru Mishalosh Ruchotav, if a person's property is surrounding his neighbor's field on three sides. So you have one field on the inside and three fields on the outside. The Gadara Tarishona Vatashnia Vatashlishit. This is where sometimes a visual might be helpful for some people, but the person in the outer field, fenced around all three sides of his field, which basically means the inner field is now surrounded by three fences. Ein mechayv noto. We don't obligate the owner of the inner field to pay for part of the cost of the fence. He doesn't have to defray the cost. That's what the Mishnah says. So what does that imply? Harivit mechayv noto. This implies that if the owner if the owner of the outer fields would put up a fence on the fourth side of the inner guy's field as well, then he would be chayiv. Haravit mechayvenoto. So what does that suggest? Shma mina ze nehena v'ze lo chaser chayav. That suggests that when a person is, meaning the guy on the inside, a person is benefiting and the other person isn't losing out, the one who's benefiting, in this case, the guy in the inner field, and in our earlier case, the squatter, would be chayav to pay. But the Gemara rejects this proof. The Gemara says, Shani hatam. No, that case of the fences around the fields is different. The Amar Le, because the person in the outer field could say to the person in the inner field, At garantli akefiyatera. He could say, you caused me the cost of additional fencing. So since if not for your plot of land, I wouldn't have had to put up a fourth fence at all. And therefore, because this is a unique set of circumstances, because this case is different than the typical case, we can't use this as a proof. Really, just to clarify, the idea is that the person of the outer fields could say to the person on the inner field, you actually cost me money, because if not for you, I wouldn't have had to put up as much fencing. And so really, this is a case of ze nehena v'ze chaser. There is a loss. So we can't use this as a proof. So now we're going to try one more. Tashma, come and try another proof from the end of that same Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Im amad nikaf v'gader taravit. Let's say the inner person's field was surrounded on three sides. Im amad nikaf v'gader taravit. If the inner person built the fourth fence himself around his own field, then migalgalan alav et hakol. Then we obligate him to pay for at least part of all the four sides of the fencing. Okay, so the Gemara understands from this, Tama de gadar nikaf. The only reason that he's paying is that the surrounded person fenced in the fourth side. Hamakif patur. But if the person in the outer field would have put up the fourth side himself, then the person in the inner field would be patur, right? So shma mina ze nehena v'ze lo chaser patur. So this seems to suggest that in a case of ze nehena v'ze lo chaser, the one that's benefiting is exempt from paying, meaning the only reason that he has to pay is if he puts up the fence himself. But if not, if the outer field owner puts up all four fences, he would be patur. So it seems to be suggesting that the rule is any case of ze nehena v'ze lo chaser patur. But we say no, we reject this proof as well. Why? Shani hatam. This case is different. This case is different here. Why is it different? The amar le lididi sagili benetira barzuza, because the person could say, or the inner field owner could argue, for me it would have been enough to have a fence that would cost significantly less. I don't need the top of the line fence. I would have been happy with something cheap and simple, right? And so this too, we also reject this proof as well. And we're going to see later on in the sugya, we're going to just see more and more proofs until we finally land on an answer at the end of the sugya. Okay, that's it for now. Good luck, everyone.